Deadpool and Wolverine has been out for a minute now, but before I talk about it, the movie made me want to go back to really see what came before, because I realized I hadn't seen like 85% of what I will be calling Fox's MCU, but specifically the X-Men stuff. I've talked about the Fantastic Four, probably will again, and I've never seen the Daredevil movie or the famous Solo Electro movie, but maybe I will someday. These movies were chaotic, good, sometimes bad, like really bad, and somehow managed to stay entertaining all at the same time, for the most part at least. And as someone who has read like 4 X-Men comics—
You what?
Yes, I know. I am not the most knowledgeable about X-Men stuff, which made watching all of these even more interesting. I've gotten my knowledge on most things involving mutants from cartoons like the 90s series or Wolverine and the X-Men games and these movies. So let's head back to the 2000s. The OG X-Men trilogy has always been an interesting set of movies to me, and I've always had good memories with them. And for a new franchise just getting its start, I was pretty surprised watching these, the first movie especially. It did a pretty good job at establishing this new world, and doing it from the perspective of Logan and Rogue felt great, even though Rogue kinda just fades into the background over time. We get to see the conflicting views of Professor X and the X-Men with Magneto and his Brotherhood, and as a result, we also get 2 of the best comic book castings to go right along with it. Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen really embodied the 2 of them so well and lay a good foundation for these first 3 movies. This one has the elements that make a good beginner X-Men story. There are mutants in hiding all over the world. Some of them are good and hanging out at a school in New York, learning how to control their abilities, while others have beef with humanity and want to do something about it. X2 kept it all going, and like any good sequel, it helped expand on everything. It has more of a focus on mutants versus humans with the introduction of William Stryker. He manages to get the government on his side after sending a mind-controlled Nightcrawler to kill the president. And that whole opening sequence just went crazy. Everything's better with Nightcrawler in it, which explains why this one was so good. Stryker raids the X-Mansion. We see the team struggling as they're split up and try to save the professor because he's been captured and is going to be used to kill all mutants telepathically with Cerebro. When the X-Men are down bad and it doesn't seem like there's any kind of solution, lo and behold, a freshly broken out of prison Magneto pulls up to help them. And if you know me, you know I love a good hero-villain team-up. We get some good action like Wolverine versus Lady Deathstrike. Some of the others get some more shine in this one. This ending scene at the White House went crazy and created this immaculate picture right here. And it just feels like everything you could ask for with an X-Men movie. But then we come to Last Stand, and this one takes a considerable dip in the quality. This movie used to be on TV all the time, so I've watched it a couple times as a kid. Based on the first 2 movies and the title of this one sounded like it would bring everything together for a solid ending. And by introducing a mutant whose power is to suppress the X gene, that seemed like a pretty strong point of conflict. But then they decided to throw in a Dark Phoenix storyline that this movie could have done without. Now look, even though I haven't actually read anything myself, I get how big of an event it was in the comics, and really how big the Phoenix Force is, because I did read Avengers vs. X-Men. And I also get how big it is when a hero turns bad. I remember it felt like the world was ending when Smurfette turned evil that one time, but I just feel like this happened too soon. We didn't really have enough time with Jean, and honestly this whole cast, for it to cut as deep as it could have. And don't get me wrong, that could come down to me being spoiled after having a cinematic universe that builds up on certain plot lines for 5 years at a time. So maybe I shouldn't even be too mad at it. But if we're gonna talk about the bad parts of this movie, we've gotta talk about Scott Summers too. Why did they do him like this? He already didn't have the most to do in the trilogy. He kinda slowly faded away into the background just like Rogue actually. And because of this movie and the spotlight on Wolverine as a whole, I didn't know he was the leader of the X-Men for a very long time. And in this movie, he's there in the first 20 minutes to pretty much just die. I'm happy X-Men 97 came out and made him look cool again, but on this movie as a whole, it's not completely trash. We get introduced to characters like Beast, Juggernaut, and Angel all in this one. The ending was pretty good to me too. For some reason, these 2000s comic book movies had people getting disintegrated, and man, if I had a nickel. Hey, you did this joke like 4 times. My bad. After a crazy death scene earlier in this movie, we also get an even crazier post-credit scene that actually got set up earlier in the movie, but we'll discuss it later. Nostalgia is a hell of a drug because although these movies weren't really the best, I still really like them a lot. This trilogy is just fun to rewatch for the sake of it. The vibes these movies give off are simply good, just like the other 2000s movies that we've dogged on over the years. And honestly, even though we spent so much time flaming them, the black leather suits do kinda go crazy. And I feel like they also suit what these movies were trying to do. They helped usher the X-Men onto the big screen and allow even more people to get familiar with these characters people have loved for years, especially someone like me. So I've always got to give them credit for that. So now we're gonna jump around a bit instead of chronological order because these movies don't make sense a lot of the time, so it's okay. Let's talk about Wolverine a little bit because after we see some of his history in X2, Fox decided to give us X-Men Origins Wolverine. And to put it simply, this movie is so much fun when you watch it, having already accepted it being trash. The first 40 minutes or so make for a good action flick. We get a pretty cool montage of Wolverine and Sabretooth fighting throughout history, and it's one of the only good things about this one. One of those other good things is Liev Schreiber as Sabretooth. They knew what they were doing when they casted him. In fact, if this whole movie was just a revenge story that ended with the two of them absolutely scrapping, it could have very easily been a hit. Their Team X roster that they assembled was alright. I never thought I'd see will.i.am in a Marvel movie, but there he was, teleporting around. At least Stryker was just as good in this movie as he had been in X2. Seeing Wolverine become Weapon X was painful to look at, but also became one of the most iconic comic book movie moments because of this shot right here. If Hugh Jackman's gonna do one thing, it's gonna be showing off the animal side of Wolverine and doing it well. But then this movie has some bad parts, man. It has way too much going on, and it's a lot more than it had to be for a solo Wolverine movie. Eventually, we find out that all the members of this team, some kind of ultimate weapon. Stryker's been capturing mutants to give him more powers, and in finding more mutants to power this weapon, we stumble upon a teenage Scott Summers. When this part came up, I was amazed that this wasn't something Kid Me dreamed up in the haziness of trying to remember this movie. Did Cyclops need to be in this movie? No. You know who else was in this movie? Gambit. And you know, for a first on-screen Gambit, he wasn't too bad. Got some cool moments to shine, nice display of his powers, but did we need him? No. And of course, we have the worst possible Deadpool adaptation of all time. I was amazed to see what Deadpool was actually like after seeing how they did him in this movie. You just gotta think of this one as one of those really bad action movies you'd walk in on your parents watching, and you know what? That's okay. Because thankfully, the Wolverine is a lot better. This movie just shows Wolverine being cool as hell, and that's why it works. To me, I think it's tied with Days of Future Past as Hugh Jackman's best look as Wolverine. The fits went insane in this one, and in terms of a story, this one is way more solid. We pick up with Logan after Last Stand, out on his own and haunted by his past. While he wants to ditch the Wolverine persona and try to pursue a different life, he ends up getting wrapped up in a conflict revolving around the very insane family of a man he saved during World War II, who also wants to take his healing factor and near immortality. And he's thrown right back into that life as soon as he hits Japan. And while he's there, he even gets poisoned and unable to heal for most of this movie. It's another one that feels like a comic book that's just been thrown onto the screen. The action sequences were great, and honestly, I just think it deserves more love. After remembering that James Mangold directed this one and Logan, you could see some of this one cross over into it, and it makes me appreciate the Wolverine even more. And look, it's the after credit scene I was talking about, but we're still not there yet. Now, we can get back to the ensemble movies, and I can talk about one that I enjoy a lot. X-Men First Class. If you want to see how everything came to be, it all starts here. It's a prequel, and I just have to talk about how Fox went 2 for 2 on casting Magneto and Professor X. James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender contribute a lot to making this movie as great as it is. They make it so believable that the two you follow in this movie grow up to be the ones that we see in that OG trilogy. When they wrote the dialogue between these two, I know it had the writer's room looking like this. And it's even better to see that the two of them started the X-Men together. But before that, Charles and Eric were living two completely different lives. Eric is a Holocaust survivor, hunting down the man who ruined his life by killing his mother right in front of him when he was a child. And Charles has been pursuing academics and wanting to help the world understand mutations through lectures, who ends up being approached by the CIA because of his mutant knowledge. They cross paths when they end up pursuing our villain, Sebastian Shaw, that same man that Magneto has been looking for. And when it goes wrong, they come together to form that First Class. Exactly. This movie is just a good time. Seeing that Mystique was Charles's childhood best friend, meeting Beast, even though he was ugly as hell in this movie. The Wolverine cameo, I enjoyed the roster of mutants that they put together and seeing them all train. Sebastian Shaw ended up being a great villain who was just in it for the love of the game, true evil on the screen. So evil that he made the camera pan over to the only black man in the room when talking about slavery.
What we can do, each of us will face a choice. Be enslaved.
And this movie ends in such a tragic way. Throughout this whole movie, Charles tried so hard to see the good in Eric and get him to see it himself. But in the end, getting his revenge was what mattered to him the most, and you can't even be too mad at him for it when he kills Shaw. And in trying to stop him one more time, it leads to Charles getting shot, and the two of them go their separate ways. Charles is left paralyzed, having lost a friend, and is ready to open up a school to help fellow mutants around the world, while Eric takes the remaining members of the Hellfire Club to pick up the pieces of what Shaw left over and execute everything in his own way. This was another one that I hadn't watched but mostly heard good things about, and this is easily one of the best X-Men movies. I'm talking top 3, and it perfectly sets up the next movie. This one right here.
It's a classic. I ain't gonna say it again, it's a classic.
This is the culmination of everything from the OG trilogy to the few movies that followed it, and it delivered. Now, remember that one post-credit scene? We see Magneto pull up on Logan at the airport, alluding to an upcoming danger, right after seeing a Trask Industries ad on a screen before. And while he's ready to fight him, Magneto understands him for not trusting him, and Professor X, fully non-disintegrated, pulls up because he managed to transfer his mind into his comatose twin brother's body, which was alluded to in the middle of Last Stand, but a lot of people actually looked it over because it was in a random scene that really could be thrown away besides that detail right there. Did you know this doctor was Moira McTaggart? Me either. Anyway, in this movie, we open up in 2023. In the future, everything has gone to hell, and pretty much all mutants have been killed by Sentinels. After Professor X explains what led to them being in this situation, and when they realize that they have a way to fix it, and only one person who is able to go back in time to fix this, Wolverine ends up going back to 1973 with the goal of stopping Bolivar Trask from getting assassinated. I think this one succeeds so much because it's so straightforward. We get to see what's happened after First Class with the X-Mansion being closed because of the war. Wolverine ends up meeting Beast alongside a young Professor X who is a shell of himself. At this point, he's addicted to a drug that allows him to walk again, but the trade-off is that it blocks him from using his powers, while Magneto is locked up in the Pentagon for killing his fellow mutant, JFK. And to this day, after watching this movie, I cannot imagine what that man's mutation was. Seeing Wolverine be sent on a mission where everything relies on him, and going back to these two being at quite possibly the lowest points they've ever been at, while also hating each other, makes this story so great. Once again, these two cook up tremendously as Professor X and Magneto. We see many of them, including Charles himself, trying to just find himself again, while Eric is just ready to release all of his anger over the last however many years for the deaths of his friends, which, by the way, it's crazy, almost everyone we saw in First Class got off-screened. You're able to see where both of them are coming from, but as the viewer, you also understand there is so much more at stake. This movie manages to blend the old with the quote-unquote new that we learned from the prequels, and do it in a way that makes sense and allows for this to be the best X-Men movie. The best X-Men movie with the whole cast. Logan, I see you. Don't worry. As we approach the end of the movie, it really seems like all is lost, especially when Magneto tosses Logan away like this. Back in the future, the remaining mutants are making one last stand, while Mystique is still trying to kill Trask, but Xavier manages to convince her to stop, and she does, saving the future. Logan wakes up in the new 2023, where he sees all of the X-Men alive, including Scott and Jean, and he also says hello to Professor X, who is the same one from the past, and he understands that this is the Logan that helped him so many years ago. I'll say it right now, because I'm sure many will agree with me. It all should have ended here. But no. It would have been too perfect. So we get a post-credit scene that sets up the fall-off. Time travel is a pretty good way to make things insanely confusing or reboot certain projects. So now we get to what I call the new gen. In the post-credits of Days of Future Past, we get a teaser for Apocalypse, and that's the next movie. X-Men Apocalypse. It's pretty bad. It picks up in the 80s after everything in Washington, and we get our new young X-Men in this one. I feel like this one starts off pretty well. Scott gets a nice intro, and we get to see him go to the X-Mansion. And after watching something like Wolverine and the X-Men, it's always nice to see a lively X-Mansion. And while I will say it is frustrating that this is what I cared about the most when watching a full X-Men movie, Magneto's subplot in this one was what I felt the most invested in. And I forgot to mention it before, but we get another iconic Quicksilver sequence. And since I've gone ahead and already mentioned those two, let's get to the bad. They build up Peter realizing Magneto is his father after alluding to it in the last movie, and show him actively pursuing it in this movie, while Magneto loses his whole family and feels like he has nothing left anymore, which is what makes him side himself with Apocalypse in the first place. So you think these two plot points would meet, especially when Peter was standing right in front of the man, but it goes nowhere. There's more I don't like about this movie than I do like. Apocalypse didn't move me, which is crazy because he's like one of the craziest X-Men villains. I feel like he's an endgame villain, not one for your first movie of your new timeline, but maybe I'm wrong. And I love Oscar Isaac, but he shouldn't have been casted for that role. This is what Apocalypse could have looked like. The Four Horsemen were cool, some of the fights were cool, but this one dropped while the MCU was reaching its peak, so that kind of did some damage to it. I also fell asleep watching this, and that'll always say something to me. You know what I mean? I wanted to be able to say, oh, that's not as bad as I thought it would be, but nah. It was. Oh, the Wolverine cameo that we do get though, fire once again. Dark Phoenix is another one that had it bad because this dropped the same year as Endgame, so I don't know why anyone would have seen it. This movie was a masterclass in making the most uninteresting movie about the X-Men fighting against the Phoenix Force, which is a shame because once again, this one started off strong. And I know they went into it thinking, yeah, we're gonna do it right this time, but it makes Last Stand look like a good movie. I don't know what it is with both the old and new versions of this story, but they really try to make you care about Jean by adapting the Dark Phoenix and doing this whole origin story for her right before doing the whole storyline, and it just doesn't work for me because neither time did they make her feel compelling. And I'd say it's because I don't like Jean as a character, but after watching something like X-Men 97, or mentioning it once again, Wolverine and the X-Men, I can say that that's not true. This new era never gave us someone to truly focus on, but at the same time, the old movies could focus on Wolverine a little too much, so this is something they've always struggled with. The villains in this one are so damn forgettable. When I watched this, I fell asleep again, because I was not having fun. But I did die laughing when Mystique died because I could only think about Jennifer Lawrence being done with the franchise at this point. In these last two movies, still, somehow, Xavier and Magneto were the best parts. And now we've got the last and absolute worst of the bunch. I will not take up too much of your time. I did a big marathon for all of these movies, and it took me 2 months to go back and finish this one. As an outsider, I was not only extremely unfamiliar with the mutants in this movie, but the movie itself did nothing to make me invested in them. I thought it took too long for the story to get moving in terms of a conflict or antagonist. I thought the actual environment of the movie left a lot to be desired because it was constantly gray and dark, which wasn't entertaining at all. Not much else to say. I know this was a COVID movie. I know reshoots happened. It's still bad though. So I don't really have too many thoughts on this era as a whole. I don't hate Apocalypse. I do hate Dark Phoenix. And I just wanted more out of these two. I think they were all about fleshing out the other members of the team, trying to distance themselves from relying on Wolverine as much, but they just went about it terribly. Before we get to Deadpool and Wolverine, there are some more I have to talk about. This next one especially, top tier, one of the best comic book movies of all time, Logan. I knew I watched something generational when it had me sobbing at the age of 12. 17 years after playing the character for the very first time, Hugh Jackman rocked the claws for what was looking like one very last time. One of the best parts of movies is that they feel like great ways to show appreciation for something. Whether it's a concept, certain emotions, certain time periods, and in the case of Logan, certain characters. Picking up on an old Logan in a bleak 2029 that isn't being torn up by Sentinels, but instead showing him taking care of a senile Professor Xavier with pretty much no other mutants to be seen. Now, sure, he's not alone, but he definitely feels like it. Not only that, but he's finally dying, slowly. And then a little girl who is just like him pops up almost out of nowhere, and in such a dark future, she provides the kind of hope that he needed, even if he's reluctant at first. And then you've got the Reavers chasing them down, X-24, all of that other stuff, sure. But at its core, Logan is just a piece to appreciate the 17 years that Hugh Jackman put in. So many people have said so much about it already, so I don't even have anything revolutionary to add to it. It's just an amazing movie. I'm not one of those Deadpool and Wolverine ruined Logan people. I just have to recognize greatness real quick. So now we can talk about Deadpool. No Wolverine yet, just Deadpool. I remember when that leaked test footage came out and it showed however old I was. It showed that version of me, that an accurate Deadpool was possible. And eventually, that version came to the big screen. The first Deadpool was great to me because it made me care about Deadpool. Growing up, I didn't know there was more to him aside from the fourth wall breaks and the jokes. So seeing a heartfelt love story, as he calls it in the first movie, was pretty cool to me. Out of the first two, I do like the second one more though. Deadpool 2 is like the first movie went through puberty and stepped into the world as an adult. Coming off of that horrible adaptation of Deadpool and X-Men Origins, Deadpool had to introduce himself properly on the big screen. And in no way am I calling that first movie bad. It was just a nice introduction to his character and the agent of chaos that is Deadpool. So the sequel catapulted off that success and shined more with an even bigger display of personality. Deadpool 2 gives off amazing vibes, keeps up with the comedy of the first fun and is even funnier at times. Like that cameo with all the other X-Men because they just so happen to be filming next door. Seeing Wade get rejected from the X-Men, him trying to draft his own X-Force, him fighting against characters like Cable and Juggernaut, all of it was hilarious to me, but done in a way that I could also take seriously. I never thought I'd see Deadpool wanting to be a father, or him in heaven talking to his love interest, but it just so happened to happen in this movie. And that is why I am impressed that despite all of the jokes and fourth wall breaks in these movies, they had real stories behind them. And it's also unbelievable to me that a gag after credit scene has gone on to bring about one of the most anticipated movies in the whole MCU and may even have some big effects on the universe as a whole. Now let's talk about it. The movie's been out for a good while now, and it's been the biggest thing for the MCU in about the last 2 years. And it's also become the most casually pirated movie of all time. I knew this movie would be big. It was just about if it was going to be in a good or bad way. Part of why it took me so long to put this video together was because of me trying to fully organize my thoughts on this movie. If we want to talk about the good, it was a lot of fun, and I think that was the main goal for this one. Ryan Reynolds was really made to be Deadpool, and he's just continued to show that more and more as the trilogy went on. I didn't think that this movie would start in the MCU with a Mr. Happy Hogan, so you can imagine how surprised I was. Hugh Jackman did an amazing job as Wolverine again, and there were points where this was arguably him at his best as Wolverine. I'm gonna discuss this variant a little bit more though, just give me a second. The cameos, solid. Cameos in general in this whole multiverse saga have just been crazy, from rumors to our imagination simply going crazy. And after Multiverse of Madness, I knew to have basically zero to no expectations because anything could really happen. But seeing Chris Evans in there as Johnny Storm had me going crazy. The Resistance Group, another solid inclusion. Channing Tatum as Gambit has brought out a whole different kind of love, and it was just satisfying to see him finally be able to suit up. Jennifer Garner coming back as Elektra was cool, but showed us that Ben Affleck probably said no. Wesley Snipes as Blade might have been the biggest surprise of the whole movie. And with the way things are going, him being the only one may age way better than we think it will. Kevin, please lock in. I feel so bad for Mahershala at this point. He's fighting dinosaurs before vampires. That's crazy. And last but not least, Daphne Keane coming back as Laura was still great, even though they spoiled it in that last trailer. When it comes to our two villains, Paradox and Cassandra Nova were perfect for the story that they wanted to tell. I love that Cassandra Nova especially was another villain who's evil really because she wants to be. And Paradox just constantly reminded me of how crazy it was to see Deadpool interacting with the TVA. This movie just made me happy to be sitting in a theater. That's what I needed from the MCU right now. But it's not perfect. There isn't much of it where I say this movie is really bad, but when you look at it for a little too long, you start to see the holes in the story. My biggest issue is how they went about this Logan variant. While the cameos that we got in that starting montage were great, shout out to Cavalrine, we eventually land on the main one that we follow in this movie. They hyped him up as a bum and the Wolverine who failed his world, and you're just dying to know what he did or what he couldn't stop. I was thinking he would be a Logan that couldn't kill Jean or one from between the Wolverine and Days of Future Past. But we don't really find out anything. We just get told that the humans came and killed the X-Men while he was gone drinking. But I was thinking, damn, did they nuke the X-Mansion? So that lack of knowledge when it comes to what happened with him made being emotionally tied to him kinda hard for me, especially compared to Logan. And that brings me to another point about this movie. For this to be the big send-off of the Fox universe that they were hyping it up to be, it was pretty underwhelming in that aspect. And it's kind of why I feel like the real send-off has to be Secret Wars. Because not seeing Halle Berry or James Marsden actually doing cool things as Cyclops, or really any OG X-Men members, kinda sucked. I would have even been happy seeing people from the new gen too. But apparently, Halle Berry never got a call, and the OGs were never considered, including Patrick Stewart, and all of that felt pretty weird to me. Then there's the anchor being stuff, which is a big thing that feels very messy when you look at it for too long. No Domino or Cable, and a bunch of things that I would really talk about. But this video is already long enough. And I also don't want those things to drag down the whole movie for me. I really wanted the MCU to show that they could get a win again after a bunch of misses, and luckily they did. So I feel satisfied after watching this one. Fox's MCU was not perfect. Some might argue that it wasn't good at all. And with a movie like New Mutants, I can't blame you. But we can't deny that it was a major player in bringing some of our favorites to the big screen. Some exciting times are on the horizon as we get closer to mutants in the MCU, and we'll have to see who they decide to start it all off with. And after doing this big rewatch, I would not be mad at all if some of those actors from the past found their way into the New Mutant saga, especially these two. These two were gems. I hope there's some room for some of the people that we didn't get to see seeing Deadpool and Wolverine in Secret Wars as long as it makes sense. I definitely want to see Ian McKellen as Magneto at least one more time. Let me know what you thought about that whole Fox era down below, whether you hated it or loved it. My bad for this video taking so long. I had a crazy summer, very busy. If you enjoyed this video, let me know by liking and subscribing because both would mean a lot to me. If you are new here, don't be afraid to look around the channel. Talked about RDJ as Dr. Doom a fat minute ago too. As always, thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves and have a good one.
You be in Miami with your family, those your brothers, ayy. When we split apart, there's the love between our mothers, ayy. No, we ain't together, but whatever, I still fuck with you. Used to get the numbers, selling flights to get them dirty